One of the greatest blessings in my life is the pleasure of meeting so many great people over the years that I've had a podcast. Froswa Booker-Drew, who is a doctor and amazing, was one of those people. In 2020, I took a break from my podcast, and then I had every intention of starting it up again in the fall. I sent this interview and a handful of others to an editor a week before my father passed away, and then all bets were off. My computer crashed, and I thought they were gone. This interview has always been one of my favorites, and I was heartbroken to think that it was gone forever until I recently found a Dropbox that has all of these interviews in it. And I wondered, what should I do with this? Because there are times in this interview that we're talking about things from 2020 that aren't happening anymore. There are so many reflections in here that are so important to us as humans who existed through a pandemic and who are still struggling. It's a really great interview, and I have reflected on it so many times since it happened, thinking that I was never gonna see it or hear it again. So please enjoy this lost episode of the Women Conquer Business show from 2020.
I feel like everybody's a leader just in their own way, whether they realize it or not.
They are, and I think sometimes we always look at leadership as titles.
Hmm.
So it's somebody granting you this title, and you're a leader in your home because you're making decisions. And if you have children, you're leading your children. And if you're in a community organization, so there are all these roles that we all occupy. And I don't think we see leadership attached to those roles. And just as leadership is important, so is followership.
Yes.
And there's more research that's coming out about why do people follow leaders. And I don't think we pay attention to the importance of that, because if you don't have people following you, what are you? And so leadership is really about influence, and all of us in some way are influencing someone. And I think it's helping reframe the way we see leadership from being a politician to being a mom who's at home, who is raising amazing kids. That takes leadership to be able to do that. It takes decision making, and you're creating policies in your own house, like little child, go to bed at this time. That's a policy decision.
It
Moms
is.
rock. And so I've been there. Mine is a young adult now, but you are making policy every day when you say things like, if you don't get that homework done by this time, X is going to happen. That's policy.
It's policy. Don't make me follow this procedure I've just laid out for you.
I do not want to enforce this.
Absolutely. It's lifelong. The decisions that you make as a parent affect children for the rest of their lives.
Oh, yes, it's huge. And
Mm.
people are messed up too because of the decisions or lack of decisions that parents made in their lives. So to do that job, you're a leader.
I totally agree. I totally agree. What else is so tell me more about the leadership vacuum as you see it.
I think without even putting into partisanship, which is getting on my nerves, because it's like at some point it's about making the right decision regardless of party. The vacuum right now is, I think we're missing people at the table whose voices have been silenced. And
Hmm.
I think that's the vacuum, is you don't get the diversity and perspective. When you look around and see most boardrooms, or you look around and see who's in executive leadership at organizations, whether it's nonprofit or for profit companies, you don't see women in positions as often. You definitely don't see people of color who are in positions. And so that's where the vacuum exists, is there's a population of people who have not had access to
Hmm.
be in these conversations, who can give a very different point of view, and and that's why we keep running into some of the issues that we have, because they're blind spots that even I'm going to have. But when you have unique perspectives at the table and unique information, you can avoid that. And that's where the vacuum exists.
I totally agree. Like with everything that's gone on since COVID, and for me, it's not partisan either. We're talking about people's lives.
Amen. Yes.
This is life or death at this point. This is about making the best decisions so more people survive.
Exactly.
That's my view, and I think that the voices that I would like to hear are actually from the moms and the parents right now around sending children to school, around how hard it is to work in these conditions. We need to start having some real conversations about how to support our society as long as this is going on so that it can continue to at least function, or what that looks like.
I was having a conversation with a gentleman about our schools here. And his comment was, we should have a checklist for parents so that parents know what to do with their kids. And my response was, there is a problem. There's nothing wrong with the checklist, but there's a problem when we don't understand that it's not just poor parents who are having problems, because the assumption is they're the ones who are not able to work with their kids. And that's so not true. I have friends who are highly skilled professionals who are having hell with their kids being at home and trying to educate their children. And I gave the example of when my daughter was home, I remember helping her do this math problem, and the answer was correct. And she says to me, we don't do it that way. And I went, I don't care. That's the right answer. She goes, I'm going to get in trouble because the way you did it isn't the way that we do it. And me being results oriented is, who cares? It's right. And she looked at me as if to say, you're not my teacher and you're not going to get me in trouble. And in that moment, I started thinking about how many other parents go through the exact same thing of, this is what I was taught in school and they're doing it different. So no matter how highly educated you are, there's still some things that you just don't have the ability to be able to do, which I said teachers are going to probably get raises out the wazoo because parents are going to go nuts now that they're seeing what they actually have to deal with all day long. Point to him was, parents need support. And this time it is not necessarily, here's a checklist of what you need to do. I think they already know that. I think what parents really need is, how do you create this village that we always talk about? And we always talk about not leaving kids behind. So what does the village do in terms of supporting both the teachers at the school and the parents and the kid, and making sure that they're able to learn, that they have the tools and resources that they need to be successful?
Okay, you're in charge of education now.
I could make a statement, but I'm not going to be political right now. I think there are a lot of folks who could do that job very well right now.
I think so too. I think that you're making an interesting point, because when I read about, first of all, the math point was the first thing I was going to say. From what I hear, they don't do math the way that I was taught, and that was hard enough the first time. I can't imagine trying to relearn math so that I can do it in some crazy, wacky new way. So there's that. But then a lot of times the conversations are around the digital divide, which I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist. It absolutely exists, meaning not everybody has a computer, not everybody has internet or a tablet or those tools. But there is so much more to it than that. And I do agree that if it was about creating I don't know, like a collaborative or a community, that would be easier, because then it would be about finding ways that everybody gets what they need, and ways that we're helping people who are working swing shift and are going into a place of work versus the person who's working from home and trying to fit in school around all these Zoom meetings like what we're doing right now. There are a lot of different needs out there, and I think there are a lot of resources. It's just finding those resources. And that's the good thing about what we're living through now, is that we at least have technology.
Right.
So we can
and
work
so many
on
folks
finding
don't have it. And that's the other piece to your point earlier. There's a population like where I'm at in South Dallas, where I work in South Dallas. We were told by a technology provider that they were going to provide it for the whole city. This community, they said, oh, wrong zip code. We're not doing it in this area. And it's an area that's low income, marginalized. And so for those folks, they don't even have the access to being able to do the Zoom meetings, which is crazy. In 2020, we're having those conversations.
Oh, yeah. No, people forget about it. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've read the statistics, but we're still talking about, I believe, 20% of our population doesn't have access. I work with a lot of small businesses. I work with the Inclusive Business Network here in Portland, Oregon, that tries to get resources to women and people of color. And I work with people who are running an entire business on their phone. Living in Portland, Oregon, and they're doing the whole thing on their phone. And we're trying to find resources to help them appear like they're not doing business on a phone, but it's all because of the resources, and then trying to help them get grants and build things enough that they can buy a computer. And it goes on in cities and in rural communities.
Yes.
And we like to forget that for whatever reason. It's not convenient to talk about those things, but it's a really big.
What COVID is doing is exposing all of these things. That's been the amazing thing about this, is that somebody asked me about why now? Why are we talking about racial inequity? And it's been around for a long time, and it has. But I think the world slowed down. This is the first time in history that everything is just paused. And even though you had Botham Jean killed by the Dallas police officer, and you had Atiana Jefferson who was killed in her own home, I think the difference is now, in addition to people being home, they didn't see it on their television. Other ones, it was you're able to go, that happened, but I didn't see it. But you actually saw George Floyd dying on television and the life escaping out of his body. And in that moment, it forced us to pay attention. It's not only we're paying attention to what's going on there, as you talk about businesses, now you're finding out that all these corporations were getting all this money that small businesses really needed and are the heartbeat of this country, and they didn't even get the money that they needed. So that's being exposed. COVID has demonstrated the inequities around healthcare, as we talked about earlier, in rural communities, and what's happening to people of color, particularly Black folks and brown folks, are dying of it because of these morbidities that had existed all this time that weren't being addressed. And so I think what this is doing is, while we're home, we're seeing all this stuff with the technology and seeing how kids are not able to have it, and what's happening with parents trying to educate their kids. I told my boss, I said, 2020 is an interesting year, because when you think about vision, 2020 is about clarity when we go to the eye doctor. If you have that kind of vision, then you're pretty good. I think this year is doing that for us, is that we're getting this clarity around who we are and where we live and what we value and who we see as important. It is eye-opening. So we're getting some vision checks right now.
Okay, that's it. Show's over. That's it. Solved everything. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I've asked people if they thought that the movement became like a force. Black Lives Matter became a real force with so many allies because people were home. It was different than people who are paying attention all the time.
Yes.
Who see it and feel it and work against white supremacy all the time. It's different when everybody's eyeballs are on it and they're like, that's a problem. And
Right.
Everybody else is like, no kidding. And yet there is a new level of allyship. And my concern is, okay, so when we get busy, we can't just forget. This is a long process because all of the policies have to be rewritten. We have to undo a lot.
Yes.
Burn it down and start over.
It's on levels, because there is this change that has to happen at an individual level, where we're confronted about the ways that we see people, and looking at things like microaggressions, and you may have been well intended, but it's offensive when you say and do these things, or paying attention to who's in the room with you and who's missing. So there's that individual piece, but I think there's this organizational piece with companies, and looking at the way that they're doing business and who are they hiring. But you also have this systemic piece of, we got to look at these policies and what we see with voting and all these different things. And so, to your point, it is going to be a battle, because this stuff didn't happen overnight. And this is going to take a lot of intentionality to dismantle this. But I'm hopeful, because I'm seeing young folks who are like on social media and doing their thing, who are now going, we got to do something. And I applaud them, because most movements, if we're honest, are not because of 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds who go, we got to do something. It's young people. When you look at the civil rights movement, it was young people who made this thing happen. And so I'm excited, because they're being engaged and they're leading this stuff, and they're doing amazing work. But I think it's also an opportunity for older folks to partner with them, because there's some knowledge and institutional wisdom that we're able to offer. And I think having these wonderful partnerships instead of it being us versus them and that millennial and boomers crap, and I'm in the middle and I was looking like, are you serious? Really? We're going to do this now?
Ooh, Gen
But
X, high five.
yes, it's like we're lost. Just sitting there
Yeah.
going, we're here. What are you two doing? I would joke about it and go, y'all are more alike than you realize.
They're exactly alike.
It's like, are you serious?
Yeah, they're huge cohorts, change maker. There's a lot of things. The difference is that when the boomers got older, they changed a lot and they forgot.
They forgot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a few. I've got a few that are around me that I'm like, you're still at Woodstock. You have not left. You're lighting up when we leave this Zoom meeting. I have a few who are so like that, but you're right. And I think that's the challenge with aging is status quo kicks in. You've got more to lose. When you're young, it's easy to get out there and go, F everybody, I don't care. But when you get older and you've got the mortgage and you've got these things, you become so bent on trying to protect that. And that's what happened to boomers. We're just lost.
Yeah.
Our generation is just like,
the 80s happened. That's what happened to the boomers. They made all that money.
yeah.
And then they forgot. Like,
completely.
That's when they handed us the keys and said, good luck getting back from school, yo.
Bottom line, we watched MTV and had a good time with it.
That's right. That's right. I think that I am excited. I'm excited because I do think that there's more willingness in our generation to help younger folks. And I think that you're right. There are some people older than me who absolutely want to pass along knowledge and help people make society better. I've talked to young entrepreneurs who are mentoring elementary students as a result of COVID, and they've started this like global initiative, and they're teaching kids around the world and in different languages and helping them with activities. And their plan is to continue it even after they start high school again in the fall, because they're just getting to meet so many kids and parents. It's all online. I'm like, the future is bright. We just need to help foster this and help it continue.
That's it. And pass down the wisdom so that they don't have the same pitfalls. And I think that's so important. It's a friend of mine and I who keep going, we've got more life behind us than in front of us, and we're getting tired. So we need you all to come on. When you say you want to do something, it's sad because as soon as we're in meetings and we hear them go, I want to help, and we all go, you do? Here. And they thought we were going to give them a little piece of, no, take it all. Thank you. You know, so I'm encouraged by that. Whereas I think even in the situation that we're in, it's so promising to see what's happening in Portland. Y'all aren't playing with protests. I'm like, wow, they're going to a whole nother level. And so you're seeing this involvement, and it's not just Black folks and brown folks that are involved. And that's the thing that's so exciting is you really are seeing people step out and go, although this may not directly impact me, it's important to me.
Absolutely. And in Oregon, a lot of people don't know what a horrible race history there is in Oregon. So there are a lot of people standing up and saying, we're not doing this anymore. And it's incredibly white here. So what really, the shift really was to see white folks in the streets as well. And they've been in the streets now for over 50 days.
And I think that's awesome.
I think it's awesome. And the absolute worst thing that could have happened was for the feds to come in, because they were probably thinking about winding it down. Oh no, now we're back. That's
at a whole nother level. And see what's so problematic with that, one, democracy, where are we with that? But number two, so now you're putting people in the system, even though they're not charged, now they have a record.
Exactly.
And so then you begin to make it difficult for them to get jobs and get housing. The same thing we saw happen here in Dallas, where folks were protesting and the police, you know, kept them on this bridge for hours and had them surrounded. And you take them in and then you let them go, but you haven't really let them go because now their names are still in the system for doing what their First Amendment right allows them to do anyway.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know where we are with democracy, to answer your question.
Yeah, that's just showing itself.
That's one of the many things that have been exposed. One of the things I've talked about with my husband a long time, and I don't think I've ever talked about it out loud, so you're welcome, is that People seem to increasingly confuse democracy with capitalism. And these are two different concepts.
Yeah, they are very much so.
And they've become so intertwined, I think, in people's thinking that they don't understand. They don't understand really what free speech means and how it's applied. They don't understand that democracy shouldn't mean that people don't make money when they can't work. That's capitalism. When you're preventing people from life, liberty, and happiness because of money, when nobody can work, that's a capitalist ideal that you're handing off and passing off as being part of democracy, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's very good. That's very good, because I never saw it that way. But it goes back to people don't really understand what it means to be in a democracy, and they don't know civics. It's as if that class just got thrown out. And when you see people who are in very high leadership roles who do not even understand the Constitution, that will constantly holler, it's in the Constitution, buying flowers, it's in the Constitution. No, it's not. People say, and I see that with the Bible, where people will make these things that I'm going, I don't know where that's not at. I'm not a scholar, but where did you get that from? That's not the thing that I thought it said. And so you have a whole population of people who are quoting things that do not exist. And they're standing on it and willing to die because they really don't know what it is. And it speaks volumes about our education system, and what we have valued as being important is missing. And so then we get people who get up and make the comments, and I was being silly about the flowers, but you get people who make comments that are that outrageous that you're sitting back going, wait, how are you in a position that's making laws and you don't even know the document that is responsible for why we're here? Wow.
Absolutely. The thing that was floating through my head is something that I've seen on the internet, which is, I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said, the internet is full of fake things. But it's kind of like that.
Because it's like, you would know, if you went through history and actually had the class, you would know that's not possible. I was a history major in college, and I've always loved history. I don't think we're teaching that in the way that young people are able to make correlations to what's happening now, and being able to look at things and go, okay, let's do some critical thinking and analyze what this really means. And so what happens is you get people who are destined to repeat things because they weren't taught or didn't pay attention to the outcome. And I think, and I told my daughter this, I think what happened for her generation especially is, you're talking about, they're not millennials, they're the Gen Zs. And here's a group who were so excited about the world because they had Barack Obama. And so they thought, I can, and they were so excited. And I remember when the election happened, and I went to bed because I thought someone else was going to win. And so I was kind of comfortable in that. And I woke up and she comes in the bedroom, she's crying hysterically. And she starts talking about her friends are going to be deported and what's going to happen. And I remember sitting there, and I think she was irritated. And I went, oh, wow, I didn't expect that, but we'll be okay. And she's like, how can you say that? And I said, I guess because I've lived long enough that I've been able to see the pendulum do this.
Yeah.
Where there have been some really extreme things happen that I didn't agree with. And now those things that you thought were extreme, you look back and go, he wasn't so bad after all. Yeah. Weapons of mass destruction. I don't know if that's so bad right now compared to what we're dealing with. Yeah. And so I told her I have perspective.
Which I never thought we would be saying, by the way. Oh my God. Seriously.
Who would have thought? And now
at least, at least you got to go to bed feeling okay. Okay? Because those of us in Oregon, our vote, it was declared before our votes were even announced.
Gee, I was stunned because I just didn't think that was going to happen. And in retrospect, it's like, it makes perfectly good sense. I get it. And I have to have conversations with folks about, you all have to understand the Electoral College.
Yep.
You can't just think about popular vote because we know what that says, but you've got to look at this. And I think it was a wake-up call to people to understand the power of not just your vote, but here is this group who's making decisions on who's going to be in office. And it goes back to this education piece that people don't have it. They don't often have the perspective, especially younger folks who have not seen some of the extremes that we've been through, those of us who are in the middle. And for me, I hate that it's happening, but again, it's a pendulum.
Right. I would like to see the Electoral College abolished. I think that it's an old thing to oppress women and people of color before we were granted the right. I think it's an old thing that needs to go away. A vote should be a vote.
Completely. And how do you tell young people that your vote matters and that happens?
It's really hard, that somebody could win by 3 million votes and it's still not a win.
It's not right.
And yet here we are again. I also think that we need multiple parties, and we can't have that until the Electoral College is gone. There's no reason to vote for somebody who's not on the two tickets because you're never going to win.
But I was having that conversation yesterday. I think we're missing, when we started the conversation about the vacuum of leadership, I think we're missing multiple perspectives. And when you have a two-party system that really doesn't allow for other voices to be included, you miss out on a lot of perspectives, and it shows up in that process completely.
Look, if the way that things are in Washington, D.C., as you and I both know, could never happen in the business world. You couldn't keep your job if you refused to talk to your colleagues.
Or if I did not tell the truth all the time and called it a truth, and they had documentation to show that I wasn't telling the truth, and yet I'm still able to. It says that there is a lot of overhaul that's needed, and for people who voted for our current president, I really believe what happened was it was a couple of things. I think you had people who were single issue voters who, I like this issue, I don't care about the rest, he speaks to this, so I'm happy, throw the rest of it out. And so it may have been one or two issues that they got really excited about, and that's what they supported. But I also think that people were tired of status quo with politicians and politics. And so it was appealing to have somebody come in from the outside who spoke to these very basic needs of disrupting the system without really understanding what that disruption could look like, and you're seeing now. And so I think that as much as we want to overhaul the system and see what's going on, this too has really exposed what can happen when people aren't aware of how the system works and how to work within it and work with the people who are part of it, and bringing other people in and voices to the table, and not, if you're not for me, then you're against me and we're all gonna go nuts on you, versus saying I'm okay with a difference of opinion. How do we negotiate and work things out? That's not what's happening. And I think that people, for their desire to want this one issue taken care of, look at what they gave up.
A lot.
Well,
I'm a government nerd, so I've never been a fan of somebody with no government experience being president. My master's in public administration just won't let me wrap my head around that because the federal system is so complex.
Oh, completely.
Capacity, mental health aside for who's in the office, the current president also was not the leader of a major corporation. This isn't Mark Cuban or somebody. This is somebody who owned a family business. So it's also not really a true test of what a businessman could do or businesswoman could do running the country, because a family business, your decisions are absolute. Somebody who is running a major corporation with stockholders, it would be more comparable to the federal government, where you have to answer to constituencies, and then there are a lot of processes. But even that is wildly different from what goes on in the federal system.
Sure. And there's the piece of, even within corporations, you have to deal with, especially if you're multinational, you've got to deal with other governments, and how do you work with them to get things done? And so there's this lobbying piece and this advocacy piece that you have to know how to negotiate, versus going in and telling people whatever you think and you can pick up and move somewhere else. It's very different. But I think people weren't paying attention to that kind of skill. I think people were enamored with the idea that here's somebody who's going to come in and tear it up, and not recognizing that if you tear it up, what else do you have to build? What's the solution to destroying it?
Yeah, there weren't any solutions presented was one of the problems. I think it's also that people hated Hillary, and I think that they don't want a woman.
I think
there were a lot of levels to it.
Oh, it was a lot of levels to it. And even though we look at her vote, when you look at the popular vote, there was a different response to her being in that position. But it's just interesting to see, even for the folks who voted for Trump, how many of them were women. And that was the thing, I think, for me, that was just like, that's very interesting.
I usually use swear words when I talk about that. Okay. Yes, interesting.
Yeah, interesting is what we're going to say, because this is G-rated. It's a family show. We're going to make it that way today.
Okay.
But I was stunned to see that women, but I'll say this, I was stunned to see people who I knew in rural America who voted against their best interests. And I see people who constantly vote against their own interests. And this idea of, I'm going to keep these people in check because this person is saying that they're going to keep this group of people in check, and I can have some things and rise up, not recognizing that our destinies are tied together. And so if I don't do well as a Black woman in this country, then your destiny is tied to mine. And if we both aren't doing well, it's problematic. And so I don't think people recognize how closely aligned our struggles are. And if we're honest, at the end of the day, folks want their kids to get a good education. You want a place to stay that's clean and comfortable, and you don't have to worry about living and and so I don't care what color you are, those are the things that you want. And somewhere that got twisted, and it became, I want to make sure that folks don't have certain things so that I have access. Well, how do you do that? That doesn't work. And my mother would always say to me, if you dig a ditch for me, you're going to have to stand there and watch me stay in the ditch. So you don't get elevated by keeping me down because you're so fixated on trying to keep me oppressed. Well, it doesn't work.
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
That's what they thought.
And people still don't realize that we're all tied together, that we're all in community together, and that the impact, the hope is that people see that what we're seeing in Black and brown communities in terms of COVID, hopefully that like sinks in for people into some deeper thinking around, well, why is the morbidity rate higher? Why are more people getting? What is this really saying about our healthcare system and access?
I don't think it's saying that, though. I think what it's saying to people is that's a disease that other folks get, and it's not going to impact me. It'll be like a really bad cold, so I don't have to wear a mask, because messaging is giving this belief that it's not going to be that bad for me. It's like, think about it. When it first came out, messaging was, it's not young people. Mm-hmm. And so you saw all these young people having parties and hanging out with each other because they thought, oh, this is grandma. Mm-hmm. And so the messaging presented itself as, I don't have to worry about it. And I think that's the same thing that's happening now is folks are going, why do I have to wear a mask? It's not impacting me. And yet we're seeing what's happening and who's getting in the hospital, that you've got 30-year-olds who are dying from this, and 18 and 19-year-olds that are white. And my thing is, I don't think viruses are racist.
No.
Viruses just go where there's a host.
Exactly. Well, and I read over the weekend that, I can't remember, I apologize, it's in Texas, that a Texas hospital had tested and found 85 cases of COVID among children under 1.
Yeah.
So before they even get started, they may have lung and cognitive problems because those are some of the long-term side effects, or they may not survive. And so this idea that we have that young people don't get it, that it's safe to send kids to school, it's false.
It is.
It's a false narrative.
But that shows the power of narrative. And if you don't have the right people in the room who can help shape it, it becomes so distorted. And the very people that you thought it would hurt, it ends up hurting other folks as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's irresponsible to me now how this narrative, even though it is impacting Black and brown folks at a higher rate, it's a very dangerous narrative for other people to believe that it can't impact you. And it's something I spent a lot of time talking to people about, this idea of narrative identity and how our stories really impact the way we see ourselves and what we tell about ourselves and tell about each other. And we have to be very careful when we don't ask who's telling the story and how they benefit from the telling of the story. So if you think about it, I remember hearing this quote about if a lion kills an animal in a safari and they're out in the wilderness, you've got to know that he's going to be the hero of his story.
Yeah.
He is going to tell the story in a way that benefits him. We've got to start asking deeper questions about the narratives that we're being presented and begin to ask, how does the person who's telling that benefit from it? Because it leaves out a whole lot of other people's perspectives of that same story.
Mm-hmm. And let's look back at the way other stories have been told.
Yes, because there's a track record.
Yes. It's not just today. We also, if we're really going to unravel systemic racism, sexism, gender oppression, non-binary, I mean, start really looking at everything. We need to look at the stories and begin debunking.
Completely. There's an author named Linda, I cannot pronounce the second part of her last name, but it's Smith. And she wrote a book about decolonizing methodologies. And it was one of the most impactful books I've ever read, because the first part of the book, she talks about these narratives that have come out through history. Like, you would have people go to tribes and take their sacred items and then say, we know your story better than you, and would write history about these tribes. And then we create museums around that, and that these are sacred items to these communities, but we feel like we know better how to take care of your stuff than you do. And so she's going through all these things that are mind-blowing, because we never think about that with museums and places like that. And then she goes into the second part and talks about how research has done the exact same thing, and how we have to be very mindful about how research has been used against communities of color, and looking worldwide to see, especially for indigenous people, how these stories have come about, that they're wild and savage and all these different things, but who was telling the story? And let's be honest, the acts that they committed against those people that you call savage is very interesting, again, my word, and continues this narrative of, this is why we did that, because they didn't know any better, when that wasn't true at all.
In fact, I think that we have, when we talk about vacuums, there's a real vacuum in terms of cultures that have been eradicated and lost and replaced with white stories, colonization stories. And that's absolutely what we need to be looking at and looking to and changing, because that's how the future looks different than the past, as we begin to really look at everything and realize that we're human, we're fallible.
Yes.
We need to recognize that and embrace that it means we need to change.
Definitely. And embrace that it doesn't mean loss. Because I think what a lot of people assume is, by me amplifying your voice means that I lose something. And the reality is that power should be shared to begin with. There is an ample amount of opportunity for all of us, where it doesn't require one person or group hoarding all of it. There is enough. And when I am able to fulfill my God-given purpose and talent, and I am able to do that freely, what does it do for you? It gives you the space to be able to do the exact same thing. And so what do we produce? What do we create because of that? Because we haven't put these barriers and oppressive structures in place that keep you from fulfilling your full potential. And I don't think we see it that way, that we see it as, if you thrive, then I lose something in the process. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can all win.
Yeah, this isn't Darwin. This isn't survival of the fittest. It's just not.
But that's what we've been taught to believe.
Yeah.
We have been taught that it's us versus them. And it starts very early in school. And so it's this competition of, I've got to be better than you, without looking at, if you're good, then I'm going to be good too. And so how do we help each other do that? We're not taught and conditioned to be that way. And some of that is that we're forced to compete so early. You look at athletic events, you're a loser if your team doesn't win. No, you didn't win that game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a loser. You just may not be good in that space. So I'm sorry, this may not be the space for you, but that doesn't mean there aren't other places where you can excel. And so I think we've been taught as a society that it is so about winning, and it's so about me. And it's not about the collective and how the collective, when it excels, everyone individual in the collective excels.
Wow. I have so appreciated this whole conversation. I hope that we get to talk more. I really do. I feel like I've made a new friend here. Can you tell our listeners how they can reach you and share more about what you do and how you help people? Because not only are your words valuable, but I know that your work is also very valuable.
So I can be reached at info@drfroswa, FROSWA.com. And my website is drfroswa.com. I do a number of things. I work as Vice President, State Fair of Texas. And in my role, I'm responsible for our philanthropic giving and our community initiatives and our educational programming, which is two of the three pillars of our mission. And I was hired in 2016 to develop a department that did not exist. And in 4 years, we've been able to do some amazing things. Like last year, we funded 67 organizations, almost $500,000. And this is what's so cool. 90% are led by people of color.
Oh, cool.
And so we're trying to change the narrative. And people go, state fair? Yes. We're trying to change the narrative of what philanthropy looks like and what community development looks like and being a really good neighbor. And I do that. I'm a part of Heritage Giving Circle, which is one of the first Black giving circles in the state. And it's just a group of women who pull their money together. And we're trying to change, again, the narrative of philanthropy, that people of color aren't always the folks who are getting things, that we have always had philanthropy in our history. And this is just one of those ways that it shows up for us. And then I'm an author. I've written 3 books. Most of my books are really about discovering your story. And I do workbooks because I love people to reflect. I don't think we create enough spaces for folks to sit down and just reflect and process information. So I try to do that in my writing, and it's geared to women. You know, 2 of them are faith-based, but the other one was based on my research of bringing diverse women together to look at how they build relationships. And what I noticed was the narrative was impacting the way people connected to each other. And so the book is really to help you think about what are the stories that you tell about yourself and what are the stories that you tell about relationships, because if you want better personal and professional relationships, it starts with you. And what are you saying about who you are? So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. All of that really resonated with me. And I really hope everybody listening is going to take advantage of everything that you have to author. Everything that you have to offer. Thank you so much for being on Women Conquer Business.
Thank you for having me.